Welcome, everybody, to the Omniverse Comics Guide podcast. We are your Omniverse Comics Guide guys. I'm Eric. That's my buddy Dave on the other side. Hey, Dave, how are you doing, buddy?
I'm fine, thank you, buddy. Eric?
Everybody that's tuned in on Twitch, our usual suspects, thank you for joining us. Feel free to chime in on the chats. People that are watching on the YouTube, we hope you enjoy the show. The production quality is second to none. My friend Dave is the graphic designer and everything you see happening right now. Most likely he's adding all these kinds of effects. That's Dave for you. And everyone listening on the podcast platforms where you're just listening on the train or in your car, don't forget to hit the rate and subscribe button for us. It always helps to get the word out there. Give us a thumbs up if you like it. Tell us what we could do better. And of course, omniversecomics.guide, where you could go for all your reading orders. All of our podcasts, videos, interviews, collector's item specials, it's there. And it's getting better and better every month because of that guy right there. Dave.
Team.
What's new and exciting in your life, my friend?
Oh, man. Nothing. How about you, dude? What's going on?
Well, other than the weather today being a pain in the butt, it wasn't a nice day today at all. I am trying to keep my spirits up by currently reading Captain Marvel, the Genis Vale omnibus, Peter David.
The envy. Oh, I saw you post some of the stuff in the Discord. Join our Discord.
Yeah. Join the Discord. That's right. I never shut out the Discord. Join the Discord. I did. Peter David's a funny guy. And he has a lot of these adult innuendos in the book that you're thinking to yourself, this must have been written for teenage boys during this era. Because there's stuff here
it's written for full-grown adult males. it's fine.
It's gotta be.
It's still funny.
Yeah, it's still funny, for sure. But on the Discord, in our panels out of context, there's a couple of things that I notice, and I'm like, that'll be funny to share, won't it? So this week, our top 10, it's going to be the opposite of our last year's episode, top 10 deaths. It's going to be the resurrections.
Yeah.
We may or may not be referring back to some of those characters who died in our top 10 deaths.
We'll say what period or storyline or series it's coming from. If you're going to read that and you don't want it to be spoiled, then don't watch that section or listen to it. And then we'll go from there. And then if people want to skip, they can skip.
Fair enough. That's the best way to do it.
Yeah.
That's the best way to do it.
Yeah.
Stick around for a good time or skip ahead if you don't want it to be spoiled.
Yeah.
That's right.
My number one, to kick us off. If you're planning on reading some late 1970s Avengers stories, in particular the Final Conflict, look away now. Or rather, skip ahead to the next one. I will start us by saying, I'm not a big fan of resurrections. I'm not a big fan of characters coming back from the dead. Death should mean death. I don't like it when they kill a character off, especially just to bring them back, which I find really cheap. Part of the reason why I didn't like the Krakoa era of X-Men and struggled with it was just the constant resurrections. Like it means death isn't the threat. I know that there are ways around, and I'm sure it was very good, and they found ways to make it good, but it bothers me. I'm not a fan. So for me, it's got to be done either really, really well, or there's just got to be some kind of logic to it. It's got to make perfect sense. So my number one choice for this week's, for my first resurrection, is Thanos, because it makes perfect sense for Thanos not to stay dead. So Thanos was killed off in Marvel 2-in-1 Annual number 2. He was killed fighting the Avengers, The Thing, Spider-Man, and ultimately Adam Warlock did him in. It was Adam Warlock's ghost. It's a brilliant story. So the death there is brilliant. It's really well told. To have it have such a good climax, steady, and then to bring the character back, it's got to be good. So it was. So they brought him back in Silver Surfer number 34 in 1990. So that's a gap of 13 years, which doesn't sound that long. When you think okay, what was happening in comics 13 years ago? It was 2011. That was post Dark Reign for Marvel. And it was the New 52 era for DC. I think that was 13 years ago. Yeah.
I think the difference, though, is that comics weren't restarting back then.
No.
So when something happened, those 13 years was a large chunk of Marvel history up to that point, right? Because they weren't a 60-year-old company either. So for that character to not have been around for a while, it may have felt like the bow or the story had been told, and that's what it was.
And
so it meant something when he came back.
Yes, and they didn't tend to bring characters back. So when they did the Book of the Dead, and I'll reference that a little bit later again, when they did the Book of the Dead issues of the official handbook of the Marvel Universe, those characters were dead. They were dead. That was the end of those characters. So in Silver Surfer 34, it's so weird. Silver Surfer has a dream, and in the dream, he's on this planet and he goes to sleep. It's the first time he's slept in ages, like decades or hundreds of years. And in the dream, he goes in this cave, and in the cave, there's this rat guy and a zombie dude, and then they unleash Thanos' soul because Death's ordered it, and then he comes out as a floaty head, and then they have a little tussle in there, some laser blasting, and he goes outside, and it's just weirder, and there's like a zombie woman trying to throw a baby in a volcano, and the baby thing tries to attack him when he saves it. It's just a bizarre thing. So he has this weird dream, and he wakes up and he basically goes, "Oh, I wonder what that meant. That was weird." And someone says to the side, it was something like, maybe it was a prophecy. Last page, there's Thanos sat in his floaty chair, his little armchair, and that was his return. It might not seem like much, but I mean, that being like, it's a bizarre issue, but it was written by Jim Starlin, who created the character, or at least co-created the character, and so he was then back to write it. So Starlin was bringing back Thanos. So what a great comeback. And then I think from the reason why it's a great resurrection for me isn't so much the resurrection itself, which is surreal. It's what comes of it. So what comes of that then is like his mission is to wipe out 50% of the population of the universe. And ultimately they have like a final battle in part 5 of this story arc. And then Thanos goes off to get the Infinity Gems, and then he comes back and he builds the Infinity Gauntlet, and then it leads into the Infinity Gauntlet event. If that's not how to bring back a villain, I don't know what is. That's probably, for me, I've kind of opened with the best resurrection for me, because when it comes down to it, the villain resurrections are the ones that make most sense. It's a real comic tradition to have villains come back and often not explain how or why they died. Like the Joker used to come back all the time. So there's probably multiple choices for I don't want to spoil anything for you there, dude, but you know, from your side, but the like, it's just something a lot of villains do. Doctor Doom will die and come back, and there'll be a reason, and sometimes it doesn't feel like there's a reason at all.
Yeah, I felt like more a variety of characters in the sense of villain and heroes came to mind when I thought of Marvel, whereas with DC, and I'm probably just not thinking in terms of villains that have come back, but I think more of the heroes in DC.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it has to do with the way the mythologies are explored within the two universes. Like even just the basis of the characters. Like naturally in Marvel, there are characters that are deities, that are superheroes, Thor and Hercules and you name it, but in DC, it seems like they're all representative of mythological figures, in some capacity, right? There's that godliness,
kind of pantheon aspect to it.
Exactly, that's a great way to put it. So I feel like those heroes' deaths and resurrections come to mind more. But like you said, Marvel, some of their villains are just as interesting and consequential in the characters and the universe's life.
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, great pick.
Cheers, mate.
I like that.
Spoilers coming up for Batman Under the Red Hood.
Okay, well, I'm not going to stray too far from Jim Starlin.
Ooh.
I'm going to select something from Jim Starlin's bibliography, and that would be Robin, Jason Todd. So the reason I bring up Jim Starlin is because he famously or infamously was the writer of the Death in the Family, not of the Family, Death in the Family, where the reading audience got to decide what would happen to Jason Todd Robin, because the issue was written in a way that was left open. It was very plausible that he wasn't going to make it out of this one if we're just using storytelling logic. But then, of course, it's comic book logic, and if you need to, we write a way that he lives, right? Yeah. Maybe he's just very badly injured. But the fans decided, spoilers, the story's called Death in the Family, but Jason Todd dies, and one of the more famous or infamous Joker murders, right? This one, he is brutal, even for a comic book of the 80s that is under the comics code, and you don't really see What you don't see makes it more effective. So that story is found in Batman 426, 429. It says that he comes back in Batman 638 where he reveals himself.
Oh, steady.
But just even as a Batman starter kit, just for funsies, this has always been my cheat code. Death in the Family, Hush, Under the Hood. You get a real full Jason Todd. It gives you everything you need to know of what makes this character tick.
Batman Annual number 25 retcons it so that Batman 617 and 618 featured Jason's return, but really he came back in 635 to 638 during Under the Red Hood or Under the Hood.
Granted, how they figured out a way to make him come back in the comics is but it's comic book logic, right?
It's mainstream superhero comic book logic, at least, yeah.
Yeah, if that's how something completely impossible were to happen, it should happen through impossible causes.
Probably, I think the reason why people may not have been as keen on it, because like during the 80s and 90s, Batman didn't really interact with the DC universe in that way. Like if you wanted to see him interacting with the DC universe, you had to buy Justice League or you had to see his guest appearances. For the most part, the Bat books were standalone. There might be the occasional issue, like there was an issue of No Man's Land with Superman in it, but how rare is that? You know, it didn't happen often. Was it Superman or Superboy's Punch? Superboy Prime Punch reality?
Superboy's Punch, yeah. Reality Punch. I mean, when you put it in those simple terms and reduce it to what it is, it's stupid. But when you think about the whole concept of where these characters are in this pocket little thing for what they gave up, this sort of like quasi heaven, if you're going to mess with the DC universe reality, I guess that's where you would do it.
Yeah.
In the storytelling realm of DC universe, right? It's dumb.
It doesn't matter.
Yeah, if that's how we're going to
have fun.
it is weird, but hey, DC Comics, multiverse, blah blah blah. But the character, again, having been somebody that it almost feels, to make a wrestling reference, it almost feels like a wrestling character who was like a heel that the people didn't want to like him. A heel is like a villain.
Okay.
So like Jason Todd Robin was disliked to the point where the fans were like, kill him off. Like, we don't like him as Robin. So much so that we're willing to let Robin die. That's how much we didn't like this kid being Robin. Whereas now Red Hood is a mainstay character. Like he's actually, he's more intense and like a vigilante than any of them are. But now he's more like, but when he was a kid being Robin, it was like, kill that bitch. You know, like, screw this kid. Now he's come back and he kills people. They're like, keep him. This guy's badass.
Wow. Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. All right. My number 2 for tonight, and this is spoilers if you're going to read Ed Brubaker's Captain America run. But Bucky was Captain America's sidekick. And most people will know this because of the Winter Soldier film, but it was done very differently in there because Bucky was the soldier. Bucky and Cap actually continued. Their stories continued in the Captain America series, and he continued past World War II. When they launched the Marvel Universe, not that they kind of went, here's the Marvel Universe launching with Fantastical #1. It was very much, here's Fantastical #1. What happens now? There was no real plan. But they launched Avengers. It was all the main characters that had their own titles, like Hulk, Thor, Iron Man, Ant-Man, Wasp. And then they find Captain America in an iceberg. So this is like one of the biggest, earliest retcons. They changed history so that just before the end of World War II, Cap was trying to stop Baron Zemo from launching a weird experimental plane stroke missile thing towards England. And then he jumped on it. Him and Bucky both jumped on it heroically. Like, risky move. You got a shield, mate. Chuck that. So they jumped on it, and then Bucky's sleeve got caught. It's like, oh, just tear it off. It's fine. Oh, I'll get in trouble.
just tear it off. It's fine.
Seriously,
but funny. Just tear it off.
It doesn't matter, mate. We'll stitch it. It'll be all right. We'll get you a new one, mate. No. Anyway, so Bucky does stay on it. The thing explodes, and Bucky apparently dies. So that was revealed in a flashback sequence in 1964 in Avengers #4. And Bucky and Uncle Ben were the two characters, at least from the Marvel Universe, you categorically don't bring back. Like, no way.
Touch him.
So the mere mention of this being a story about bringing back Bucky was it was one of those things that seemed to incite a lot of rage from that area of comic fans. I wanted to see it play out because I read some of Brubaker's other stuff, and he's a great writer, and he'd already established himself as a great writer by 2005, and that's when Captain America #1 was launched. It was around the New Avengers period, so Cap and Iron Man got new #1s. They got their own new titles, and they were the only two members of the original, or at least early days Avengers, who were in the new series. So that was when Spidey, Spider-Woman, Luke Cage, all those other characters joined. But Cap needed a bit of refreshing. So on jumps Ed Brubaker, Steve Epstein doing the art, and they do the thing you don't do. And they have an assassin kill the Red Skull. And like, that's not okay. The Red Skull's been killed a couple of times in the past. Like, okay, it's not about that. And it's like, the pieces start to come together. So Bucky does appear in the first issue, but he's kind of shadowed. And then there are these rumors floating around, and he appears again in #3, but again in shadow. He doesn't. It's not actually revealed until issue 6, where you see him in full. He's got a straggly hair. He's got the kind of domino mask, and he's got the metal arm. And Sharon Carter goes, "I think it's Bucky." And you go like, "What?" Like, shit, I'll get a shiver now thinking about it. It's nuts. It's like, it's a comic, mate. It's a comic. What are you doing? It was one of those things that hooked me completely. And then that storyline goes on to like issue 14 as you're trying to figure out, is it Bucky? Isn't it Bucky? And we know now, especially since they made the Winter Soldier into a film, that it's Bucky. But wow, what a ride. And the thing is, even when it hits 14, you go, okay, where are we going to take it now? Is it going to be a redemption arc? Sort of is, but not in the way we think. And this is why it's a great resurrection. It's not just the way they turned Cap into a spy series. It was like a Black Ops spy series in many ways, with a mystery. It's like, whoa, this is a whole different thing for Captain America. How cool is this?
Yeah, because Captain America is very swashbuckling.
For the most part, right? It's a classic superhero book. Occasionally he'll do jobs for S.H.I.E.L.D., but even then it's like, it's not necessarily spy stuff. It's a dude in a red, white, and blue pair of pajamas, with little wings on his nut. Like, it's not going to be. Don't tell anyone I'm here. I'm incognito. With his little wings. It was full-on pure Marvel Comics magic when you had a really great Captain America story. Bright American flag running. And it's not to say that Ed Brubaker's stuff isn't patriotic. It very much is, but it's also got that paranoia that who do you trust? Because Cap, you realize, no, he works for a government agency. He knows a lot of things that would frighten us. And top of the fact he's an Avenger. Yeah. Like... And those connections to S.H.I.E.L.D. really play in as well, like with Sharon involved, and it's really smart. But that's in terms of it being a great resurrection as well. The last thing you think is going to happen, Civil War kicks off, Cap's an outlaw, Civil War ends, no Cap anymore. Who takes over as Cap? No, come on, the assassin guy that came back from the dead. So what the hell? It's the twists and turns in that run, especially the main run, as it goes from the beginning of that series up to Captain America Reborn miniseries. It's incredible. It's a near perfect run of comics, superhero comics or otherwise. It's so good. I mean, the end bit is very blockbustery with a ton of characters in it. But in terms of, again, just focusing on the resurrection, it's a rule breaker. It's the most untouchable thing. You don't do it. And that's where, like, doing something like this has to be really, really good. And it has to matter. And it's both. And he does it so well.
Yeah, 100%. It lives up to all the hype that surrounds it. Big thumbs up to Ed Brubaker for that entire run. It was quite a feat. Okay, speaking of resurrections and feet...
Is it Rob Liefeld character?
No, but it is a quick-footed character, and it's the Flash.
Spoilers, Ed, for DC Universe Rebirth, mate.
In this case, it's the resurrection of Wally West, or him being brought back, not Barry Allen. A lot of the stuff we've listed, there's a lot of aftermath, and the aftermath of Wally West being brought back. I'm not 100%, but I've heard enough from Heroes in Crisis that there's a lot of disappointment in the direction that they went. I haven't read it. I started to, and then I kept hearing sort of half and half things. Yeah. I didn't want to get upset. I didn't want to read a comic that would make me upset. Yeah. So I will stick with the Rebirth one shot. I think it was 80 pages. Seeing Barry and Wally have that reunion after so much time. So for him and Barry to be reunited after, I think it was 30 plus years, or maybe around 30 years, because certain characters after New 52 were altered, changed. In this case, it was that reunion of the two classic characters, the kid and his idol. In a lot of ways, Barry Allen's best friend. It was so touching. So just for the reunion of it, it like scratches that sort of itch of if I could just have that moment. It does it perfectly.
They were reunited though before Flashpoint, because Barry Allen came back when Wally was still the Flash.
Wally didn't really die when the New 52 started. He just didn't really exist. Yeah. He wasn't included. So this moment, it's more like a timeline has been readjusted where this character who didn't exist anymore comes back into existence, and a person's memory is jogged. Like you've come back to life. Yeah. And that reunion with the Titans, that Titans book for first couple of trades that I read, I quite liked it.
Oh, so they put Wally in that team?
Yeah, Wally was on that team. Reunited with his Titans brethren. That nod to the classic.
Yeah.
Like Dick Grayson and Wally West and Donna Troy. I don't know if Donna Troy was on the team. Yeah, the original. That's right. You're right.
Because the current, incidentally, I've been reading Tom Taylor's Titans, and that he's in there as well. So he's back, and that he's got his own series written by Cy Spurrier, which is fairly well received. In terms of like the resurrection meaning something, the current Flash in his solo title is Wally West. He's back being the Flash again.
Cool, that's great.
Spoilers ahead for Spider-Man's Clone Saga from the 1990s.
Your number 3. Take it away,
number
Dave.
3 for tonight is, I'm going back to villains. This was a really, really controversial one when it happened. So if you haven't read the Clone Saga, this is going to spoil it. You know, the fact that it happened in 1990. Oh, I have written it down. I didn't write that down. The fact that it happened in 1996 is irrelevant. There will still be people who haven't read it. Some people weren't even alive then. But this was the climax. God, I love that word. This was the climax of the Clone Saga. So this is a big spoiler for that. The resurrection in question is Spider-Man's main bad guy, which is the Green Goblin. It's Norman Osborn, comes back at the end of the Clone Saga. So Norman, he does the worst possible thing. He kills off his girlfriend, Gwen Stacy, in Amazing 121. But then instead of hanging around for a while and be able to kind of milk that he's done that, the next issue, they kill him off as well. Like, it was a pretty major time. So they did a two-part.
And it lasted.
It lasted. So it's 1973. Amazing Spider-Man 122 comes out. The final battle is very similar to the one they have in the first Tobey Maguire film.
Very.
Yeah. It's basically panel for panel on screen where the Goblin Glider goes through him. Jump ahead to 96. The end of Amazing Spider-Man number 418, where he appears in the last panel. That final arc of the Clone Saga and the Revelations 4-part crossover. And then how he survived is revealed in Spider-Man, the Osborn Journal. It explains that he didn't actually die. It was the Goblin Serum that healed him. People didn't want him back. People were very upset that they brought Norman back. They'd resolved one issue, which was the Clone Saga, that had gone on
too long.
It's a tough one to argue that it had it gone on too long. Yes, and they didn't just go, let's wrap it up. They went, let's wrap it up and do something really controversial, which is ballsy. So they brought back Norman Osborn again, one of those characters who you shouldn't bring back from the dead. 23 years between, and this is what I mean. People go in the revolving door of death. The revolving door of death has only really been around since about 2004, 2005. Before then, resurrections weren't that quick, if they happened at all. In terms of this one, the reason why I've listed it in best resurrections, though, again, it's like making it count.
That's the key.
Was it a cheap shot to bring it back? I mean, you could argue that it was. You could argue it was gimmicky. It did cause a lot of upset. Were people talking about Spider-Man finally again? Yeah. So it worked. The best part about it was that they made Norman the villain. So they brought him back, and then they made Norman the villain, not the Green Goblin. By issue
right, because
250 of Spectacular Spider-Man, he'd bought the Daily Bugle and messed with Spider-Man in a very different way, and they introduced a new Green Goblin who was crap, but they served a purpose. He was trying to establish that he was never the Green Goblin, because there was a book released about him being the Green Goblin, so he had to kind of discredit that to fix everything, and that ran on for a bit. The ending of that period, not great, like the final chapter storyline. There were some great stories that came later, though, like A Death in the Family, a Spider-Man version, so don't mix it up with the Batman one. Then jump ahead to 2007, and he's leading the Thunderbolts after Civil War. And then after Secret Invasion, of course, he takes over S.H.I.E.L.D. and leads the Avengers.
I was going to say, like, his Norman Osborn became top 3 key villains in the Marvel Universe for a number of years, where it's like, oh, that's a heavy hitter. Like, oh, shit, he's here. Right? Almost like a Lex Luthor level.
Yeah, he essentially filled that kind of role, didn't he? And I think the reason why people weren't keen on it is when you look back on the Green Goblin's original stories, he only ever fought Spider-Man. Should we do a breaky break?
Let's do a breaky break.
Don't you panic, it's not a mistake. It's time for the Omniverse breaky break. Yeah. New to the Omniverse this week. For reading orders, we've got Transformers, 1984 to 1994, the Marvel years, so that is not a massively complicated one. Also, we've got Death's Head, who is a Transformers character, one of my favourite characters, Marvel UK. If you're a Death's Head fan, I'm your best friend. Finally, we've got The Leap, which is a Nightwing storyline. It's the one that kicks things in motion for the Titans and sets up their new status quo for the current Dawn of DC era, and that will lead us into Beast World. Podcast and video, we've got top 10 most wanted DC omniverses. So you can also jump on there and listen to our incoming May 2024 episode, where we pick out our recommendations for the month of May in 2024. Exclusives, our first ever Who's Who Surviving the DC Universe entry. If you subscribe to the Omniverse Comics.guide website, and you're a DC fan, that's the first of those. I'm A to Zing the key appearances of those random characters and seeing how they survive from the Bronze Age to post-Crisis to post-Flashpoint. That's it.
You're a gangster. I don't know how you do it all. Thank you, sir.
Gangster nerd. Gerd.
All right. My number 3. I'm going to go with another pretty obvious DC resurrection.
Spoilers on for the Jeff Johns run of Green Lantern.
And this is Green Lantern. Hal Jordan, Green Lantern. Now, how it all goes down in regards to Hal Jordan dying, as we maybe not all know, but Hal Jordan kind of suffers a really, really bad bout of PTSD. That's to put it mildly. He gets overcome with a fear virus, if you will, that completely takes over his personality. But while it's happening, you think that it's just him going out for revenge and vengeance and to get his way, because he's literally lost everything. After his city is destroyed.
It wasn't even in his own book.
It wasn't even in his own book when it happened. Obviously, the grief, the sadness, the failure, everything that comes along with it, and being a Green Lantern Corps member, couldn't even save his own city, right?
Yeah.
Quite the story of revenge the quest that he goes on. He turns into this super villain, uber villain, but he redeems himself in the storyline called The Final Night. He sacrifices himself and he goes out, I guess, as a redeemed character. And then they bring him back in a storyline called Day of Judgment, which I did not read.
I read it.
Was it good?
It's by Jeff Johns. It's not his strongest moment.
Right.
If you just read the main 4-issue minis, it's there to bring Hal Jordan back. It's designed to bring him back. Technically, though, it's not a resurrection at that point because he's
the Spectre, right? He's brought back to be the vengeance, God's hand of vengeance, right? Long story short, he comes back to Green Lantern Rebirth, which famously leads on into the Jeff Johns, Peter Tomasi era of the Green Lantern Corps, the story, Blackest Night, Sinestro Corps, you name it. They thought it was so good and it sold so well that they said, let's make a movie out of this, because this is the hottest character at DC. Needless to say, it's quite the journey that you'll go on reading this resurrection story and a true redemption story, because on the fall down, Hal Jordan has a lot of sins to answer for when he gets back to his right mind. And there's a lot of people that are part of the Green Lantern Corps who look at him and say, "Oh, really?" Or even Batman, for that matter, is the least to trust Hal Jordan, who was, an original member of the Justice League and yada yada yada. He's like, "Yeah, no, I'm not feeling you. The rest of them might be suckers, but not me." So it's as interesting of a return to being a hero to also that self-discovery of like, how do I make things right with people? Great series.
Okay, my number 4, it's from Astonishing X-Men. So spoilers for Joss Whedon and John Cassidy's Astonishing X-Men. If you have read it, you probably know who I'm going to be referring to. It's actually from Astonishing X-Men number 4, so it's from 2004. It's picking up from a death that was actually only 3 years earlier.
Is that it?
It felt a lot longer.
I thought it was longer. I thought it was a mid-90s death.
It was Uncanny X-Men 390, and that was 2001. What they did when they implied someone was coming back is they released like fake cover images that showed Phoenix. So everyone's thinking like, oh, they're going to bring back Jean. But they're showing all these Phoenix images, and then you pick up the issue and it's not. And that was one of those times where you could do that. Nowadays, they just go, yeah, do you know we're bringing this character back next month? You're picking it up? You are? Yeah, lovely. All right, see you then.
Don't miss out.
Yeah.
Yeah, you got to get in the 500 different covers you can get with it.
Yeah. Whereas like with this, and they did variant, they did like 2 covers, but it was a surprise. So the X-Men have gone back to wearing their kind of more traditional superhero-y costumes as opposed to Morrison's run where they were all in black leather. And they break into this place where there's a cure for mutants. Kitty Pryde, who can become intangible, she gets spotted by guards. She's shot at, and from behind her, which should be an empty space, she hears like the bullets hitting metal, and she turns around, and there's the guy that she used to be in love with. Not when he died, but obviously he still carried a torch for him. That's a weird phrase, isn't it? I'm going to carry a torch for you. Is that all right? Where do you want it? You got batteries? It's weird. Anyway, she turns around and there's Colossus, whose ashes she took to Russia. She took his ashes back to his family. So it was still that strong connection with them, even though they weren't really together. He's there. He's alive. And then he runs through her. What a great moment. He runs through her, and then he goes and quite aggressively attacks these people. But when he turns around, he sees her. He falls to his knees and he says, "God, please, am I finally dead?" It's like, what? What's this? What they did was, so it's been prophesied that a mutant from Earth will destroy the Breakworld, this alien planet. So the guy from the Breakworld, Ord, it comes to Earth and tries to find a way to end mutants, to take away their powers. In order to do that, they resurrect one who'd been killed, and they muck about with him. It turns out he's got the legacy virus in. So his death, Colossus' death in issue 390 of Uncanny, was a real heart-wrencher. And the way that they did it as well, where they used his first lines from his first appearance on those final pages, was like such a well-written issue. Scott Lobdell wrote it. It's a proper tearjerker. And then this happens, and you're going, what the hell? So he resurrects Colossus. They used the legacy virus to create this cure for mutants, because he injects himself with the the cure for the legacy virus, which was like, it was a metaphor for AIDS. And his sister had died from the legacy virus in Uncanny 303. So Ilyana was dead as well at this point. Another possible resurrection candidate there.
That's right.
Yeah, so he had that
Rasputin family come back.
They don't have much luck, do they? Poor bastards. So they took the cure from him to then make the cure for mutants by dicking around with it.
One of those moments where the resurrection is like, I wasn't expecting that.
It's a shock. It's the genuine shock of it, and they played it really well, because again, like resurrections weren't major at that time. It wasn't happening a huge amount, not really,
right?
And then to have done it this way and to have played the audience and set the expectations up, and everyone thought they knew what they were getting. Spoilers on for Grant Morrison's Batman Incorporated and Tomasi and Gleason's New 52 era Batman and Robin.
Number 4. This is fun. I'm enjoying talking about these stories, bringing back good memories. Okay, I love this storyline. I love this series. I've spoken about it before, and we've given this creative team their flowers a number of times. But going back into the Batman family, and again, it's the same, not the same character, but the same character, and this is Robin, Damian Wayne. This one is his actual son with Talia al Ghul. So Robin Damian Wayne gets killed in issue 8 of Batman Incorporated. It's the series that Grant Morrison continues to write about Batman after the New 52 is launched. So that's where Damian, goes bye-bye. But I would pick up reading the series. I didn't know how to
I've
put
never
it.
heard that dramatic moment described in that
Go
way.
bye-bye, right? Bye-bye. Say
Bye,
bye-bye.
Damien.
Bye, Damian. Batman's gone through this before.
Yeah.
And like we mentioned, it was one of the most tragic things that happened to personally to him, his biggest loss. Now imagine his own son. So if you pick up the series in Batman and Robin 18, it's a bit of a commitment, but you read to issue 40. Robin Rises Alpha 1 and Batman and Robin Annual 3 covers the single issues that kind of, and the reason why I go so far back to the Batman and Robin issue 18 through to those mid 20 issues where Damian is no longer in the book, it's establishing what kind of a headspace Batman is getting into because of what's happened to him.
Mm.
And he's changed. He's dealt with the Court of Owls in one book. He's dealt with the death of the family. He's lost his son. For me, this is where the titles at that time shift, where Batman and Robin as a title really pull ahead of the Batman book pack at the time, because it's how desperate Batman becomes to correct this wrong. And it's a ridiculous premise that he has to go to literally the ends of the earth or other earths to do this. It's so good, so epic, so ridiculous, but
doesn't matter. It's so dramatic, isn't it? It's just so dramatic. But it's the character change, and like you're saying earlier about Jason Todd, it's a completely different reaction. Partly because of the actual familial connection, but it's not just that, is it? Because like he still took Jason Todd under his wing in the hope that he was, going to do the right thing, and he was a good kid, and he just needed a chance. But Damian was something else. Like he was a murderous little bastard raised by assassins.
Yeah. This character being brought back and the quest that Batman goes on, it's definitely not grounded in Gotham City sort of grungy reality, but it's okay. It's fantastic.
Yeah.
It's so good. And again, sometimes these characters are more appreciated when they're taken off the screen or off the page for a while. And you can appreciate like, oh, that's why. And the other thing too is we're not talking about the deaths, but his resurrection, it means so much to the other Bat family members as well.
Yeah.
As much as they hated that little prick. When he comes back home, even like the dog is thrilled to see him. Like it's really good.
Spoilers coming up for Mark Gruenwald's Captain America and for Rick Remender's Punisher. My last one for tonight is it a cheat? Not necessarily. So they're about to release Mark Gruenwald's Captain America run. This story will be in it. This is not just one character dying. This is a whole load of characters dying. My number 5 is the victims of the Scourge. So Scourge of the Underworld, he would go around randomly, seemingly, killing supervillains. He first did it in Iron Man 194, which is 1985, and he would sporadically appear and kill off a villain. So if you saw like a real CD-list villain in a title, you could half expect them to die at some point over the course of that year and a half. So it was a very strange period, but he would just randomly show up and just shoot somebody, and he would say justice is served, and he'd disappear off, and he would be in disguise. So you never quite knew who it was or what was going on with this thing. But if you were picking up lots of Marvel titles at the time, you may have seen this, and it all culminated in this 3-4 part story in Captain America. The moment I'm talking about in terms of the deaths was Captain America 319. All the villains are talking about the Scourge of the Underworld. They go to the bar with no name to discuss what to do about the Scourge of the Underworld, and it turns out it's the barman, and he just sprays them with bullets. He just kills all these characters, loads of them, and it was a way to get rid of all the crap D-list characters. That was it. It's like, why don't we get rid of all the dross? Like, all right, we'll have them murdered, and it was pretty shocking. Like, this is mid-80s.
Mm-hmm.
So all these characters die. We're here to talk about resurrections. Now, this is where some people may go, are you for real? You're really choosing this? I am. and I'm choosing this from an entirely selfish point of view as a proper full-on continuity nerd. In the Brian Bendis New Avengers era, the first era of New Avengers that he did, he was bringing back characters to use in the Hood's army. And it looked like, and I saw some people comment this on other things, so it's not necessarily my words, but people going, he's just flicked through a Marvel handbook and just picked characters at random. But they're dead. They're dead. They're dead. They're dead. This doesn't make any sense. There's no explanation. How are these dead characters coming back for the Hoods to join the Hoods army? There's been no sign of them being around. They haven't come back in the last couple of years and then popped up. It's like they're all just suddenly there. So the way they explained it was in Rick Remender's Punisher. The first story arc, under Norman Osborn's direction, the Hood is trying to kill the Punisher. And he tries to lure him out by bringing back his family. So that story arc ends. Microchip is back, who was another character who was killed off, who was Frank's best friend and his computer guy. So he's back. He's resurrected by the Hood. And it seems like the Hood can resurrect people. So what they do at the end of the storyline, it's this great double-page spread by Jerome Pena. There's loads of coffins. And the explanation as to why there's so many dead characters in the Hood's army is because he's been bringing them back from the dead. So it goes to some way to explain how he gets his powers, because he just found this magical cape a while ago. It's actually the magical cape is powered by Dormammu, which was revealed just before. But anyway, let's not go into that because it's too complicated. There's a big circle of coffins, and all these villains that the Scourge of the Underworld killed off come back from the dead. And it's like, oh, okay, we have our explanation. What he does then that's quite nice, though, is to make that make sense. He says, right, you're all back from the dead, and you can stay alive if you kill the Punisher. So they then have to go off. All these shit villains have to go off and find and kill the Punisher, which leads into the next story arc, which is Dead End, I think it is. It's a fun period. It does result eventually in the Punisher being chopped up and the Frankencastle storyline, but we're not touching that tonight. Just wanted to talk, because I loved the Scourge of the Underworld stuff. So when I was a kid, I had those official handbook of the Marvel Universe, trade paperbacks, and there was a great bit in the Book of the Dead. And if you're a bigger fan of the Book of the Dead issues as me, jump on the Omniverse Comics Guide, subscribe. We have a regular feature, semi-regular feature, where we spotlight a character from the Book of the Dead and let you know their history, what issues they were in, the key stories, and if, when, and where, and why they came back. But these were the Book of the Dead issues that talked about the Scourge's victims. And I would look through these heads just going like, who's that guy? What can they do? What's the deal there? And I loved it. And I had to go and track down those issues where they were killed and just to watch them die. What a psychotic little bastard I was. That was what I did. And then I think eventually then I read the Captain America issues, but like I was fascinated by this. They were just really random. I love low tier characters. And then what he does is he just brings these terrible characters back. Turner D Century, he's back. He rides around on a penny farthing. Ooh, watch out, Punisher. It's hilarious. Just silliness.
That's a deep cut. I like that.
Well, I thought like some of the choices, they're going to be the big obvious ones because they're some of the best resurrections. I'm not a fan of resurrections. So the ones I've chosen, I mean it. I mean it. I love these ones. For whatever reason I've explained. Scourge of the Underworld's victims, I love it because of the deep cut thing and the D-list villains and the explanation as to why something that was basically a massive continuity error, why it happened. And that makes me super happy. So that gets my nerd vote.
Yeah, that's great. Nice. Nicely done. Nice way to bring it on home.
Our last round of spoilers is for the death and return of Superman, which in itself is pretty much a spoiler.
My fifth one for the night. This is extremely obvious. I saved it for last, but it's also my nostalgia from childhood. It's the return of Superman, of course. I talked about the death of Superman last time. So right after Superman goes bye-bye, gets the last punch from Daredevil, Doomsday.
Whoa, Daredevil's hardcore in that story.
Yeah, sorry. Doomsday, the letter D came to my head.
Could have been worse.
It's the scene right after, quite literally, where Lois is holding him. The next book continues right where the last punch took place. So the death clearly was a game changer as far as comic sales were concerned. It was on the news. But what was cool about aftermath of it all was all the characters that got center stage. You got 4 new characters in the Superman universe that they created. The Daily Planet and all the side characters, you got to get to know them a little bit more. Lois's relationship with the Kent family, Clark Kent's legacy as a reporter, those type of things are explored. And then bringing him back, you get a whole bunch of tie-ins to the Kryptonian legacy that was being set up in the Superman Exile story. So it really brings a lot of things on home. Not every story in it is gold. It's tons of comics being read, but it's the entire experience. The final showdown for me, again, as a kid, it was that moment. I was maybe 9 years old. It was that moment where it clicked, like comic book connecting the pieces when it's like, oh, it's a callback to this Cyborg is really this character that I have that issue.
Oh yes, I remember. Yeah,
haphazardly, right? I didn't buy the first appearance of the Cyborg knowing it was. So when he reveals himself, I was like, what? The whole time, it was that character.
Yeah, it is a random choice, isn't it? But it's a payoff.
Very random. Yeah, very random for him to be the real big bad. And again, Cyborg Superman becomes a real major villain within the DC universe. Like when you see him show up, he's a heavy hitter.
I've got a question for you.
Go ahead.
Of the 4 from Reign of Superman, who was your favorite? And then who did you think? Yeah, that's good. That's probably a more sensible question.
I didn't know. I thought it was Cyborg Superman. I thought that was their way of kind of explaining here's how he can exist.
Yeah.
It's going to be a different version of him, but it's him. And he's going to have like a weapons arsenal attached to him. And that's why he's kind of like a heavy metal rock star now. Because he was killed. The one that was the last Kryptonian looked kind of the most like him, where you're like, well, he looks like Superman. There's no robotic pieces. He's not a kid. He's not a black guy in a steel suit. Like, I never thought it was Steel, for one.
No.
Yeah, and he never made it seem like he was the Superman. He was just...
No.
I'm in his place because he saved my life and I'm going to pay it forward. So out of it, you get like a really great sort of Superman family that to this day, those characters exist. And when they show up, they're pretty vital.
Yeah.
And then of course the actual comeback, like I mentioned, I think a few weeks ago, I don't know if it was Love Stories episode that we did where I talked about him returning to Metropolis, and in all of that, there was an issue there. It was in Action Comics. I think it would have been 692. There's one part of the story that's Superman returns.
Yeah.
But then in the Action Comics, they take the time out to say, here's how we bring back Clark Kent. And I thought that was really well done for the way they use the characters. It's like problem solved. We never have to worry about the identity issue. Who's Lois with? Clearly she knows both of them. She's in a picture hugging both of these guys. And it was settled. It was like...
Did they solve it in one issue?
One issue. I like that issue with the Phantom Stranger and Supergirl and how do we bring back Clark Kent into the story without it being weird that, well, Superman showed up and lo and behold, there's Clark.
I was in a cupboard for 3 months.
Right? Exactly. So a lot of reading, but it's always collected, always available. All of these stories that I think we've listed are pretty easy to get a hold of.
Yeah, I think you'll find them somewhere. That's nice. This is the thing. I don't think there's any major issue with talking about some of those bigger ones because they're big for a reason. It's just which ones did work, and I think they're the ones that work. I mean, certainly, I'm not going to talk on your behalf, but obviously you would have chosen the ones you like. But that's what we're doing here. We're talking about the stuff we've loved, and these are the ones that have worked for us.
And it just makes you want to go again. You can spoil the outcomes of things, but really, what it comes down to is how it's done.
Yeah.
And where do they go after it, after the event, after the stunt, if you will. Don't forget, guys, check out that omniversecomics.guide, like Dave mentioned before. If there's a reading guide there, it's the best reading guide on the internet.
Shucks.
Yeah, and I'm not just saying that because Dave's here. I've seen and used a bunch.
And you can say what you really think.
Good night, everybody. Dave, bid you adieu.
Double salute to you, dude.
Double salute.
See you all next time, everyone. Bye-bye.